Hey everybody, how you going? This is going to be a video that it's not quite worldview series, but you could probably see how it definitely relates to worldview. What we're going to talk about is the 5 stages of persecution. You may have heard that word persecution and you don't know what it means. You know it's something bad, but ultimately persecution is the collision of worldviews. So it's when 2 worldviews that are fundamentally different come together and they clash with their values and what they want to do, how they want to change the world or what they want to make the world into. And persecution is the way that a worldview will try and suppress and ultimately try and destroy the other worldview. People throw that word persecution around sometimes, and so persecution properly understood is the treatment of a group of people. Someone might say the laws against pedophilia is persecuting pedophiles. That would not be technically correct because that's just a one issue. That's not a whole belief system. Persecution can be informal or formal. Informal means that it's not part of a government strategy. It's not being written into the laws or the political discourses or things like that. Informal persecution is when your neighbor or your family member or your members of your community find out and they shun you. They might sort of try and convince you to come back if you've just recently converted to the new worldview. It's a social stigma that negatively portrays a worldview. In today's world, it's driven by gossip, Facebook posts, Facebook comments, the negative stereotypes, the memes and the satire, the open ridicule, and published literature. So, for instance, someone might write a book about why this particular worldview or why this particular group is so bad. You saw a lot of this in Germany, not necessarily, like definitely just before Hitler, but also in, stretching throughout the history of Germany. There's a history of just informal persecution of Jews in Europe general, but it's a little bit more obvious in Germany. So that is informal persecution, and informal persecution often precedes or grows with formal persecution. These are not sort of hard and fast. So you can have an informal persecution of a people group for decades. Maybe 100 years. These are the things that one group just has like a negative attitude towards another group for some historical grief. And that informal persecution can be part of culture. But formal persecution is different because this takes it up a notch. It usually happens in tandem with the informal persecution, but it can be something that front runs informal persecution, right? So formal persecution is methodical and it's specifically targeted. And it happens in 5 stages. 5 stages. And you could probably see, if you look at Australia now, some of the things that have happened, some of the laws that have been passed, you would probably be able to see examples of worldview persecution. Things that are not just single crimes, but are actually targeting people with a worldview. Or if you look back into history, you might be able to see some things that are formal persecution in other parts of the world. So stage one of formal persecution is to identify the target group. And you identify them by either physical characteristics or their belief system and the behaviors that go along unique to that belief system. So, for example, Orthodox Jews wear a certain style of hat, and they have a certain style of haircut. So that's a physical characteristic. But their belief means that they go to a synagogue on Saturday. So that would be a religious behavior. Or Muslim people pray at certain times during the day. That's a religious behavior that is quite unique to them. It's these type of things that you look for. You look for what is unique about the target group. After identifying the target group, stage two is to marginalize the target group. What does marginalize mean? Marginalize means forcing the group to be considered fringe, right? Not part of mainstream society. So how do you do that? You isolate them. You isolate them socially. You exclude them from public discourse. You put pressure on them to quit public offices. You enforce unreasonable restrictions so that they can't fulfill their religious behavior and have a job at the same time. Make it difficult for them to get seen or get heard in a positive light. It limits how they're seen and heard in public. That's what marginalizing does. It's a subtle attitude that a government or a company of the CEO of a company or the leadership of a company have with a certain person. It's a policy decision to marginalize. That's the formal persecution, stage two. Okay, stage three is to vilify the target group. Vilifying is turning them into villains. Now that they're essentially isolated, the only time they're seen or heard is for doing something wrong. So a good example of this is how Roman Catholics, priests have been vilified, so that it doesn't matter whether a Catholic priest is guilty or not of a crime. They're considered to just be criminals. And I think you know what I mean. That is a good example of a group that has been vilified in the third stage of persecution. You even bring things up from the past about the group that they've done wrong, and you start blaming the present group for it. So, for instance, Christians led the Crusades and the people on the Crusades murdered all these people. You Christians now are bad because of that. That's not fair. That's vilifying. So stage four is where it starts to become. It gets to the stage where they're marginalised and they're vilified enough that now the governing authorities can start to pass laws against the target group. And so in identifying what the target group does that is unique to them, as far as behaviours and other things like that, you then pass laws specifically targeting those behaviours or that group. So, for instance, if a company wanted to formally persecute Muslims, they would say, you can take your break at these times and no other times, and those times don't coincide with their times for prayer. Or it might be Christians pray, so you can't pray for this people or that people, otherwise you're going to get fined or you're going to come up against a council. That's a form of persecution. It's when laws are specifically targeting people on the basis of their religious beliefs or their cultural beliefs and their cultural or religious behaviours. Stage 5 is simply when you enforce the law. So passing a law isn't the same as enforcing a law. When you pass a law, what you're doing is you're sending out the fear. You're saying this group is being targeted. Don't mess up. Because ultimately you want them to not be that group. This is, as I said at the start, the goal of persecution is to minimize people becoming part of that target group or destroying the target group. So in the case of Jews in the Second World War or gypsies, ultimately it was the people that you wanted to destroy. Whereas other forms of persecution is if you give up those beliefs and you take on our beliefs that we're trying to make you have, we'll stop persecuting you. So historically in Christianity, that's how the Romans persecuted the Christians. They did things like, for instance, forced everybody on pain of death to offer a sacrifice to the emperor, and Christians wouldn't do that. And so because they couldn't do it, they were killed. They were executed for committing a crime. This is the enforcement. So just the passing of the law is to send out the fear and say, we're targeting you. Now's your opportunity to not be part of this group because we're going to get them. And there's a bit of time where it starts not, like the laws exist, but they're not being enforced. And then at stage 5, that's when they start being enforced. And usually what it is making an example of a leader. So the way that they start enforcing these laws is usually, so depending on their strategy, it'll be a big thing. So if they want lots of people to be scared to leave the group, they'll get one of the leaders of the group, right? One of the well-known leaders and persecute or to enforce the law on that person. And it's very publicized to have the effect of increasing the fear, to say, well, they're serious about this, so that the people who aren't committed to that worldview will leave that worldview and take on the worldview or the alternative that's being pushed, right? Quite often these laws will include fines, property confiscation, and humiliating punishments and or restriction of public services like healthcare or access to welfare payments, which is part of our modern world. The reason is because you're trying to punish the group. So you might look at people who are quote unquote anti-vax. The government might restrict people who don't take the vaccination by restricting services. I mean, this is, a great fear at the moment. So these are forms of the 5th stage of persecuting a worldview, like a people group that have a specific belief system. I'm confident that these are clear and that you'll be able to see them in your interacting with what's going on at the moment. Persecution is wrong. It's not moral. It's not fair. It inherently elevates one worldview and pushes down another. So if the people doing this persecution or these forms of persecution are saying we're about equality, there's a fundamental disconnect there. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because I think there are a couple of good examples of persecution that can be seen at the moment in Victoria, in Australia, but also in the rest of the world. Recognize in yourself, okay, how have I been conditioned to marginalize these people? How am I being manipulated by media to be part of vilifying these people? if you don't want to be part of the problem and you want to be part of the solution, you're going to have to reflect and you're going to have to think, okay, what's my opinion about these people? Am I possibly feeling pleasure in marginalizing them or going, yeah, when they're vilified in the media or when someone says something nasty about them? Think about it. Don't allow people, whether they're anti-vaxxers, Christians, Muslims, Jews, it doesn't matter. Don't be part of persecution. Thank you for watching the video. I appreciate the time that you spend, and I appreciate the conversation that gets generated from watching these videos, and I hope more can happen. If you want to support what we're doing here and what I'm doing with these videos, I have a separate group called The Looking Glass. Go over and join that group, and you can receive special videos and little blogs and little things that I'm not able to turn into a big production like this. It was good seeing you. I'll see you later.
Have you noticed, Matt Wong, that when you watch the news, nobody smiles anymore?
First of all, you use my last name and have outed me, but second of all, you're supposed to be serious. It's news.
Is it news? Is it news?
Watch the People's Project 7:30 p.m. Fridays on Discernible, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.